All right, like I said, my name is Craig Dinkel with the Midway District crop production agent, which covers Ellsworth and Russell counties. Very appreciative of Jeff Ockenpaw with partnership on this Milo Plot that we've had. This year has been very tough on our weather conditions, but actually these tough years is when you, to me, learn a lot, and there's a lot to learn from drought years. It just sucks to go through. But that being said, I'm gonna just kind of go over some recap of this last year's weather, talk a little bit about seeding rates, planting dates, for some soil fertility and nutrient management stuff. And all this information was sourced from K-State Research and Extension Specialist, Dorvar Diaz, Soil Fertility Management Specialist, Lucas Haig, Northwest Area Agronomist, Ignacio Ciampiti, he's our crop production system specialist, and then got the weather data from the K-State Mesonet and National Weather Service. Just to recap the 2022 growing seasons, well, as you imagine, dry and hot was the theme. Got a little bit of the field history out at the plots. We planted the Milo plots June 17th on a hot 100-degree day. And since then, we've only received 2.27 inches of precip since June 17th, which is the lowest on record for that period, and that came from the National Weather Service, just out of the Russell Airport, mile east. And then we've also had about 23 days over 100 degrees in that time frame too. Normally for that period, we should have about a little over 9 inches of rain from June 17th till now. So that's just kind of a recap of, the lack of moisture that has fallen on this field since June 17th. What's our normal for a year to date? That's January 1 till, I pulled this data on Monday till now. We should be sitting around that 24 to 25 inches normally for a year to date precip, and as you move east, you can even get more towards that 30-inch range, going into Ellsworth County. And then what's our observed precip? What's highlighted is the Lorraine Mesonet Station. So they've received 16 inches as a year to date. Hayes, a little under 10 inches. And Russell's fallen, kind of somewhere in the middle, around that 12-inch range on precip, about 12 inches of rain as a year-to-date precip. And I always like looking at what's our departure from normal. Looking at Hayes to Lorraine, Russell's going to fall somewhere in that, little over 9-inch range too. So we're about 9 inches below normal on our precip, what we should have for our, general one till now. Now, how does that play into seeding rates? This is kind of interesting to me. That's where I kind of threw in the seeding rate trial too with Rodrigo. You look at your kind of average annual rainfall, we're typically going to fall in this 26 to 32, which, on our target final stand, we should be looking at 35 to 55. But on a year like this, where we're falling less than 20 inches of precip, we really should be in that 23 to 27,000 on a final stand, and that'd be put you about dropping 30 to 35. And that's where, looking at the conditions we had, I kind of made the decision to drop at 35 at the plot, and then of course we had issues on emergence after that, so we ended up lighter anyways, which on a year like this was actually a good thing. But typically, I'll ask what is everybody kind of planting on seeding rates for this area, if you farm in this area, or seed reps that you hear. 40. Yeah, that's on a normal year. 40 to 45 is, about where you kind of want to drop your seeding rate for, in my opinion, in this, Russell, Ellsworth County area, and kind of like what I did this year, if you're looking at a dry year, possibly dropping at that 35,000 rate if you think it's going to be a dry year. Then planting dates, typically, we fall in that zone 2. Ellsworth County kind of falls a little bit in that zone 3, but there's no real difference. I know this year, from what just observations I saw, the guys that did get Milo in early, it kind of seemed to be the better deal on Milo this year. There was actually even a field of Milo harvested off Old Highway 40 just west of Ellsworth yesterday that got planted early. And typically, Milo is a warm season crop. You kind of want to watch your soil temps. Anytime that soil temp hits 60 degrees and it's looking like you're going to maintain it, you can go plant. Like I said, has anybody tried sticking in Milo first part of May? Or is that typical, wait till end of May, 1st of June is kind of the typical planting? But this year it's kind of weather dependent. We kind of hit a little wet streak there, so a lot of Milo kind of fell in that mid June to late June time frame this year. There wasn't a whole lot of Milo that was planted early. Now this is an interesting fact that got from Lucas Haig is the planting date effects of tillering and also on yield. The only thing I wish I would have gotten the information on was what was their population that they considered low, medium, and high. I don't have that data, but you can see when you plant Milo early, even at the low population, which is green here, Milo can compensate due to the amount of tillers it puts out, and that's where the yield the tillers kind of made up for the yield, and same way with the medium, and not so much on high. But as you move towards later plantings, you kind of lose your effects of your tillers, and that's where farming does. There's a lot of science that goes in farming, but there's also an art, and adjusting your planting rates as you move later in the season can be also a big factor in this your overall general management of your field. Because, well, like that Heartland Genetics variety, a short season, you'd want to plant a little higher anyways, because the shorter season varieties, they don't tiller like a medium or a medium full variety. So it's just something to consider. If you're planting early May to mid May, you could drop your population and still be okay on your yields due to tillers making up for that lower population. But as you move into June and later, you might have to make some of those population adjustments and plant a little bit heavier to make that up. But that's all going to be factor weather dependent, what type of hybrid you got, variety, whole bunch of factors that you kind of have to make on the fly. And then I just wanted to mention this. Soil testing going forward for all crops is going to be big on any farm operation. We're looking at more uncertainties on fertilizer production with everything that's going on over with Ukraine and Russia. So it's gonna hit home. Just if you want to make sure you test your fields to go forward. If you can save a little bit of money on nitrogen and phosphorus, soil tests are gonna let you know where you can cut back on what fields. Typically a 0 to 6 inch sample is, for your pH, or phosphorus, potassium, organic matter, and then pulling a 0 to 24 for your nitrogen, sulfur, and chloride. Like I said, that's going to be very big going forward for farmers managing their fields going forward as soil testing. And you guys should have all that handouts with all this a little bit more information. This was just, I thought, good information to present from Dorvar that I've seen that I gave on a presentation. Like I said, pulling correct soil samples is very, very critical in this step, and then also proper handling of those samples. What's coming up next is a study that Dorvar and I think a PhD student of his, that they did a study of how the samples were handled after they took them. This was more geared towards nitrogen. So they sampled and then they left some of the sample bags like in a simulated toolbox, to simulate like a farmer or somebody else that might be pulling samples for a farmer. If they're just pulling samples over a week's time and throw them in like a toolbox, what would happen on those results compared to samples that weren't left in a hot toolbox or a hot pickup. And as you can see, the soil tests, especially on nitrogen, after even the first few days, have really increased over time. I believe it was a 10-day period. And this is on parts per million. I'll show you coming up better data on it that shows it as pounds. But nitrogen, especially sitting in a hot vehicle, really can skewer your results and thinking you might have more nitrogen there. Any guesses the reason why that would happen? Don't make me call on somebody. Greg?
I don't have a clue.
Well, what happens naturally in a field?
I gotta guess. They keep it probably speed up like an evening composition of litter or organic matter, and as litter and organic matter decompose, there are these things like nitrogen.
Yep, that's correct.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. Essentially, it makes that, especially if it's moist, the organisms in there will break down that organic matter and then essentially mineralizes all those nutrients, and especially nitrogen. So that's where it could read false high on nitrates, whereas if you collected it and then stored it properly in like a room temperature, 78 degree, air dried, so you might think you have more nitrogen out there than what you really do. And the same way would go for sulfur here. You can see that it kind of acted the same way. Not really much on iron on there. And here's the parts per million compared to pounds. So that'd be right after they pulled the sample. Then by day 10 or 12, if you submitted that sample to the lab 12 days later after it sat in a hot vehicle or hot box, it could show about 80 pounds of nitrogen that's not really there. I believe the samples came back at, I showed about 20 pounds of nitrogen that was really in that sample that they did this with. So I just kind of think that's kind of interesting and wanted to hit home on the importance of proper soil sampling and even soil handling after the fact. The best way to do that, if you pull over a week's time, is pull fields, take them back to your house, store them in the, even your garage is fine as long as it's a not really extreme hot, place, 78 degrees, about room temperature, air dry them, and then once you get everything sampled, then send them off all at once. And that's just showing the air temperature inside the toolbox from when they started. You can see it got over 125 degrees and was pretty well consistently over 100 degrees for that 10 days that those samples were in that box. Like I said, the take-home points is they're strongly affected by how you handle and sample your fields. Air temperatures inside your pickup or inside any cargo box can affect your results and outcomes. Then just to go over some sorghum fertility, this is just showing the sorghum nitrogen uptake. The example that Dorvar kind of gives here is just 150 bushel yielding Milo. That's going to require about 230 pounds total of nitrogen for a 150 bushel crop. But when you start factoring in a little bit of credits, typically you're getting about 20 pounds per percent of organic matter mineralized throughout the summer. So given that 40 pounds credit, then this crop was planted after beans and got a little nitrogen credit there. And then factoring in your 0 to 24 profile nitrogen soil sample, like I said, showing 30 pounds. And then, like I said, once you factor in all that, you get about 110 pounds of nitrogen that's coming from the soil. So that just leaves you with the difference to fertilize about 120 pounds to reach that 150 bushel yield goal. And you can calculate this for any of your 100 bushel, 80 bushel yields too. Just kind of do the same little formula. Now, one thing I think is a good take-home point is, especially with high fertilizer prices, is this how you're applying fertilizer. You can actually cut back a little bit on your total fertilizer applied just by how you're applying it. Roughly, I think Dorvar said about 10%. This study was, they put out just 90 pounds of actual N. They did just a straight broadcast of this is all UAN applied, but then they did a dribble application and then knifed in some also. And as you can see, the broadcast yield about 110 pounds or 110 bushel the acre. Just doing a dribble, even just dribbled on the soil, went to 119. But when you knifed it into the soil, it jumped to 130. That's just moving your nitrogen use efficiency to where that plant's utilizing it better. I know if you're set up to do 2x2 with your planter, you could really, it would kind of slow down your planting progress, but you can actually put a good chunk of your nitrogen down 2x2 with your planter and help your nitrogen use efficiency and kind of reduce your overall fertilizer use by just helping your efficiency of that crop.
On the knife, was that a strip till machine where you cut right back into it, or is that what direction was it?
I didn't ask Dorvar what that was. I I'm guessing that'd be like a culture rig, would be my guess. But it'd be similar to like a strip till scenario where you're putting that nitrogen in that strip scenario. And just to go over some other nutrients, that's where soil testing can come into play. Sorghum will respond to chloride, that being if the soil test is low. As you can see, where they applied nothing, and then 10 pounds, 20 pounds, and kind of interesting. You got a little bit of slight decrease at 30, but that's there again. The importance of soil testing to know what nutrients you actually are short on and might get a response. Zinc, didn't mention this, but the field did get some mez on it, which has some zinc on it. Does anybody else kind of put on a little bit of zinc, either with mez, starter? But that's another one that sorghum will respond if the soil tests are low, which a lot of times most of the soil tests I see, we are pretty low on zinc. So that's where products like mez and 40 rock, something with a little bit of zinc in there, can come into play and kind of help give that Milo a little bit of a boost. And then pH, of course, sorghum's always liking around that mid 6 to 7 pH. Here we're at least lucky. There is some areas that we deal with high pH, but not like they do in western Kansas. We do have some areas that are kind of getting a little bit low on pH, so that's another good reason to just make sure you're testing your fields, knowing where your soil pH is, and if it is low, you might have to put out some lime. Then just to wrap it up, I'm going to mention this. Like we discussed out at the varieties, we kind of commonly talked about sorghum aphid tolerance. They definitely are still around. Ellsworth County has kind of been a hot spot this year. Know of several fields that have had to be treated for them, but they're usually the non-tolerant varieties that have been sprayed. And just something to be on the watch out for, and even in years to come. And definitely plant aphid tolerant varieties. Definitely monitor them before spraying for headworms. Because if you go out with just regular insecticide, pyrethroid insecticide, you'll kill off your beneficials, and then you might kill a few aphids, but more than likely they're going to explode because you get rid of their beneficials. There are a couple products out there that won't harm your beneficials. Halogen is kind of a newer little deal. It's actually a virus that you can spray out once the Milo is fully headed, and it infects the headworms, and then it just kind of keeps spreading to other headworms that are out there. So it's kind of a natural control method. And then Black Hawk, that's spinosad. And then I believe we got told about another one, like Previthon can be also another option that's a little bit less harmful to your beneficial insects. So just wanted to kind of end on that, just make sure everybody knew that they're definitely still out there and can still be an issue. Like I said, we want to thank you all for coming, and if you have any questions, I'll be around, or any questions from the presentation that I can try to answer. And if you're on social media, I do have Twitter at Midway Crops, and then our Midway District K-State and Extension Facebook page is I try to put information out there for producers and anybody to follow along throughout the growing season.